I'll tell you right now, if you ever wake up to the sound of your history being ripped out of the ground by a bulldozer, you don't just stand there with your coffee and take it. You don't go all zen and breathe in the cedar dust and say, "That's life." No, you burn. That's how I started my day, the kind of day that makes you want to cuss at the sunrise. I heard the roar before I even had a chance to finish my first sip. It wasn't thunder, wasn't a truck. It was something angrier. By the time I made it to the edge of my property, my 100-year-old cedar fence, the one my granddad built with his bare hands, was being chewed to splinters by a bulldozer. And there she was, Karen. You know the type, HOA royalty. Sunglasses bigger than her face. Lips pursed, arms folded like she was posing for a magazine called Homeowner Tyrant Monthly. The damn nerve standing there giving orders to the bulldozer guy, as if my family's legacy was just yesterday's junk mail. I yelled, maybe not the most dignified shout voice cracking and everything, but I didn't care. That fence was history. It was blood, sweat, tears, and late-night whiskey stories in the moonlight. It marked the land where I learned to be a man. Karen didn't flinch, just smirked and told the guy to keep going. "This fence violates HOA standards," she said like she was reading from a teleprompter. "It's ugly. It's falling apart. Ugly." My granddad's fence ugly. I could have punched a hole in the sky right then. But see, here's the thing about rules. Folks like Karen use them like armor. She hid behind the HOA, waving that little book of bylaws like it was the Declaration of Independence. "You signed the agreement," she said, her perfume choking out the smell of sawdust. "Maybe this isn't the place for you." It was like she'd spat in my coffee. I snapped photos, threatened court, barked at the operator to shut it down. And God bless that kid, he listened. I ran my hand along the jagged stump of what used to be a post, could almost feel my granddad's rough hands over mine. A fence marks your ground, what you protect. That's what he always said. "You just tore down a piece of my family," I said, quiet, but it landed hard. "Karen," she just laughed, "do what you want. The HOA doesn't lose." She stalked off heels, digging ruts in my dirt like she owned the place. I stood there in the quiet, heart pounding, the sun breaking through the trees, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a cold, sharp kind of anger settle in, the kind that doesn't go away with sleep. I stood there breathing cedar and rage as the dust settled. Thought about that summer of 25, the way Grandpa and his brothers cut every log by hand, sweating through their shirts in the heat, building something meant to last longer than they ever would. That fence withstood floods, droughts, blizzards, tornado warnings, and teenage mischief. And in one morning, Karen bulldozed it all for community standards. I walked the line, remembering every repair with my dad, every story about protecting what's yours. That's what Dad used to say, handing me the hammer when I was a boy. "Someday this will be yours, son. Don't let anyone take it." And there I was, a grown man, feeling 10 years old and helpless again. But not for long. Took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and started gathering evidence. Photos, videos, hell, I called the sheriff too. He said he'd send someone take my statement, but I already knew how these things went. The HOA wasn't just some club. Around here it was like the law, and the mob had a baby, and Karen was the godmother. Still, I wasn't leaving. I didn't inherit this ranch just to hand it over to someone who thought a rule book was more important than roots. She moved here 5 years ago. I'd been here since birth. My blood was in this dirt. I looked out over the wild hills, could see the horses my granddad used to break running free beyond the fence line. It wasn't about the boards. It was about legacy. That night I dug out old photos, family barbecues, black and white shots of Grandpa and Dad building the fence. Kids riding stick horses along the posts. I scanned every one. Put together a dossier so thick it'd give a lawyer a headache. But I knew it'd take more than paperwork. Karen wasn't the type to quit because of a few angry letters. The next morning, as I sat brooding over my coffee, I found an envelope stuffed in my mailbox. Official HOA, letterhead, of course. Notice of violation and restoration fee. $2,500 for cleanup and aesthetic restoration. That's when I realized Karen didn't just want my fence gone. She wanted to rub my nose in it. I balled up the letter, drove straight to her place, 3 streets over, the one that looks like it's been pressure washed by angels. She was out there pretending not to wait for me. Good morning, she purred, sunglasses on, iced tea in hand. I take it you got our notice? Our notice, I shot back, waving the crumpled letter. You bulldozed my fence and you want me to pay for it. She just tilted her head, smug as ever. Rules are rules. You signed the agreement, no exceptions. My blood boiled. This land was mine before you ever set foot here. You don't get to decide what stays and what goes. The HOA always wins, she said, sipping her tea. We have the power to enforce standards. If you refuse, we'll take further action. I almost laughed. Lady, you're lucky I haven't called the sheriff on you for trespassing. She didn't blink. Call whoever you want. The law and the HOA aren't the same thing. It hit me. She wasn't just counting on the rules. She was counting on fear. She'd bullied everyone else one by one and nobody stood up to her. On the way back, I bumped into Dave, my neighbor, the only guy on the block whose grass was more weeds than lawn. He shut off his mower, waved me over. Heard what happened. Sorry, man. Karen's been on a power trip lately. Fined me for my mailbox last month. I just nodded. Maybe it's time someone stood up to her. He gave me a look. You think you can take on Karen? I don't just think it. I know it, but I can't do it alone. He hesitated, then stuck out his hand. You've got me. That's how it started. The dominoes fell. I went door to door, found folks who'd been fined for wildflowers, for a flagpole, for their kids' bikes in the driveway. Lisa, single mom down the street, she'd gotten a warning because her kids left their bikes out too long. Joe, Vietnam vet, fined for having the wrong kind of flagpole. The more I listened, the angrier I got. This wasn't about rules, it was about power, plain and simple. 8 of us met on my back porch that afternoon. Stories flying, frustration boiling, but for the first time a bit of hope, too. She can't pick us off one by one, I said. Not if we stick together. Think we can flip the board, Dave asked. She's got those folks wrapped around her finger. Then we find proof, I said. Document everything. Every fine, every letter, every abuse. Once we have enough, we call a vote. Lisa grinned, eyes shining for the first time in weeks. Can we really do that? Absolutely, majority rules. But as we talked, I couldn't shake the thought of those wild horses. Karen loved her pristine lawn, her little tours for the board, showing off her flowers. I caught myself grinning. I've got another card up my sleeve, I said. Joe raised an eyebrow. What kind of card? I just winked. Let's say a little untamed history in her front yard. Lisa giggled. You're crazy, maybe I said. But sometimes crazy gets things done. Over the next 2 days, we gathered evidence, built our case. Meanwhile, I prepped the plan. My granddad taught me how to guide wild horses. He called it speaking their language. I fixed up the old corral gates, laid out hay, set up ropes to guide them toward Karen's street. I made sure it was safe. Last thing I wanted was anyone hurt. Dave agreed to keep Karen busy while I worked the herd. When dawn came, I loaded the pickup, whistled low and sweet, just like Grandpa taught me. The lead mare lifted her head, recognized me. One by one, the herd followed, manes whipping in the wind, hooves thundering. By the time they hit Karen's block, I could hear Dave distracting her, talking mailbox paint colors. Then came the moment, wild horses charging onto Karen's perfect lawn, flattening her flower beds, knocking over her gnome statues. The look on her face, priceless. She shrieked, tried to wave them off, but she was just a blade of grass in a hurricane. I leaned on my truck, arms crossed, called out so the whole street could hear. Looks like the neighborhood's got some new visitors, Karen. Don't worry, they're not violating any rules yet. The neighbors poured out, phones up, filming, laughing, finally seeing the queen dethroned. Karen was shaking, yelling, You did this. You can't just unleash animals on my property. I shrugged. Funny. That's exactly what you did to mine. I corralled the horses off her lawn with another whistle, just like Grandpa would have done, the herd following me back as the crowd applauded. Dave slapped me on the back. You should have seen her face, man. Beautiful. That night, the videos went viral in the neighborhood group chat. People who'd never spoken before were patting me on the back, calling me a hero. Karen demanded an emergency HOA meeting. She was furious, and honestly so were a couple of her cronies, but most people were just fed up. At the meeting, she tried to spin it, calling me the chaos bringer, but the tide had turned. I laid out my evidence, photos, letters, the deed to my land, videos of the bulldozer. Joe and Lisa spoke up, their voices shaking but strong. The vote was swift, almost unanimous. Karen was out. For the first time in years, people smiled, leaving a meeting. The new board promised full compensation for my fence. Karen was on the hook for repairs, and every unjust fine she'd slapped on my neighbors was being wiped clean. Word was she quietly packed up and moved out by the end of the week. Some folks might call it karma. Me, I just call it balance. That weekend, with Hank the carpenter and half the neighborhood pitching in, we rebuilt the cedar fence tall, straight, and stronger than ever. I stood by that new rail as the sun went down, ran my hand over the wood, and whispered, "We did it, Grandpa. We held the line." For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight lift. It wasn't just about winning. It was about reclaiming something that mattered. I learned something in all this, something that snuck up on me in the quiet after the storm. It's not just about fighting for your land or your rights. It's about fighting for the stories, the memories, the bits of ourselves we build into the world around us. Sometimes the law is just ink on paper, but justice, well, sometimes you have to get creative to make it real. So now that Karen's gone and the fence stands tall, the whole place feels lighter. The wild horses still run free. The neighborhood actually feels like a community again. And me, well, I get to sit on my porch, cold drink in hand, and know that sometimes if you stand your ground, you can turn the tide. Let me ask you this. Where's the line between order and tyranny? When does the rules become just another excuse to bulldoze what makes us human? If you've ever had your own run-in with power gone wild or stood up for what's right, tell me about it. Drop your story below or just weigh in. When does justice cross the line into revenge? If this tale struck a nerve, share it. Let's hear your stories about justice, about bullies, about holding the line. Because sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand up and 100 wild horses.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.